On the Buzz Meter this Sunday, Martin Bashir resigns under pressure at MSNBC, saying he deeply regrets his disgusting comments about Sarah Palin. Why did it take so long for the talk show host to pay a penalty? Could he have kept his job if MSNBC had moved quickly to suspend him? And will this affect the tone of cable talk? President Obama tries to boost his sagging fortunes by turning to Chris Matthews and MSNBC.
How do we get back to that confidence that we can solve our man-made problems and other problems?
Why was the host of Hardball playing such softball? Glenn Greenwald, who published those secret NSA documents, under fire from critics who say he's profiteering from Ed Snowden's leaks. Greenwald will be here to respond. Plus, 60 Minutes swoons over an Amazon idea that it might, maybe someday, deliver your packages with drones.
Let me show you something.
Oh, man. Oh, my God.
Was that segment an infomercial for Jeff Bezos? I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. There was a mystery surrounding Martin Bashir after those vile comments about how Sarah Palin deserves an old slave punishment of being used as a toilet.
When Mrs. Palin invokes slavery, she doesn't just prove her rank ignorance. She confirms that if anyone truly qualified for a dose of discipline from Thomas Thistlewood, then she would be the outstanding candidate.
Why did MSNBC do nothing for nearly 3 weeks? But after meeting this week with MSNBC President Phil Griffin, the British journalist said he is leaving the network. Quote, "It is my sincere hope that all of my colleagues at this special network will be allowed to focus on the issues that matter without the distraction of myself or my ill-judged comments. I deeply regret what was said, will endeavor to work hard at making constructive contributions in the future." Palin, a Fox News contributor, ripped the culture at MSNBC, but also, and this is rare, praised the mainstream media.
It's an immature and kind of petty way of trying to destroy someone. It was refreshing to see, though, that many in the media did come out and say, look, our standards have got to be higher than this. Those with that platform, with a microphone, a camera in their face, they have to have some more responsibility taken.
So what will be the fallout from this nauseating episode? Joining us now, Lauren Ashburn, Fox News contributor and author of the top Twitter talk column on FoxNews.com. Rick Grinnell, Fox News contributor and a former Bush administration official. And Kelly Goff, special correspondent for the website The Root. Should Martin Bashir have lost his job over these comments?
Yes, it was appalling. It was misogynistic. It was gross. We could go on with adjectives forever. And it took 3 weeks for the network and Martin Bashir to come to some sort of agreement.
Why did it take so long?
Well, I think they were negotiating a package, possibly seeing if the media would die down and the incident would go away and they could continue and accept the apology and his ability to make some constructive changes. But the media, as Sarah Palin said, to its credit, didn't do that. They did not let up.
Bashir did apologize, and I wonder, Rick, if MSNBC had quickly suspended him and he's off the air for a month and then he comes back and tries to make a clean start, could he have kept his job? Could this have blown over? Was it the mishandling that really was the problem here?
Maybe. I think that's a really good point. I don't think he should have been fired. I don't want to live in America where you can't state your opinion and make a mistake and then apologize and move on. I really want a place where if you're a bad talk show host, like Bashir's show was, you lose your job because of ratings, because nobody's watching, and it's a supply and demand issue. Nobody wants what you're pitching. I think that, you know, when you go back and you look at the history of journalists who have lost their job over remarks, I think it's a really sad commentary on where we are in America.
I don't like it when anybody loses their job, and we all make mistakes on camera and sometimes blurt things out. The thing about this was that it was scripted, it had graphics, it was premeditated, in other words. Kelly Goff, what about Sarah Palin saying there's a different standard in the media when a conservative woman is the target of this kind of language?
Well, I have actually said that in the past, and there are actually progressive women who have said that she was a victim of sexism and misogyny. And I think that that is, you know, without question, and that should be something that, as a woman, that you step up and criticize regardless of what your party affiliation is. I will say, though, in this instance, I'll split the difference here. I think that part of the real issue in terms of how this ended up being handled is that there seemed to be, in the eyes of some, the double standard with how the Alec Baldwin situation, right?
He was gone pretty quickly.
Immediately. And I've written about this sort of about like which groups it's okay to target versus which ones aren't. I mean, there were plenty of, athletes and Hollywood stars who have been known for beating up girlfriends, but if you make a homophobic slur, you lose your job pretty quick. I think there's something, interesting here. And Alec Baldwin actually was pretty vocal, as we know. He's very vocal about everything, but he was pretty vocal about why is this guy still on there?
You should be able to criticize the president and not be a racist. You should be able to criticize Andrew Sullivan and not be a homophobe. You should be able to criticize Andrea Mitchell and not be sexist.
Nobody's saying he couldn't or shouldn't have criticized Sarah Palin if he disagreed.
He could have called her an idiot, but he stepped over that line. He stepped over the line where you're talking about defecating in someone's mouth. How is that okay?
It's not okay. I'm not saying it's okay. I think it's a terrible comment. All I'm saying is when you say a terrible comment, you should be judged by whether or not your ratings are up or down, and if you're not a good host, then just get rid of you.
No, I'm going to split the difference here. I think part of it is definitely how you handle it. And so what was interesting is there were a couple columns written about how the reason that he survived and Baldwin didn't is because people thought he was going to survive at the time, is because he immediately apologized and apologized the right way. I think a lot of us sort of have apology fatigue where someone does something, their boss says, we're going to have to fire you if you don't go on camera and say, I'm really sorry if anyone was offended, and not mean it, not seem genuine. He did seem to offer a genuine apology, but this is the question that I think we're debating.
I agree with the genuine apology part. As far as the mainstream media, though, it seemed to me the outrage was selective. I mean, when Bashir resigned, New York Times put that story on page B2. Now, imagine if a Fox host had resigned after making outrageous comments about Hillary Clinton. Do you think it would have been buried inside the B section?
No, it would have been on the front page. And that's the whole thing is that when you go after a conservative woman, there's just not the same outrage. And that's my point, is that we can't live in a society where there's only certain words or people, if you go after that's crossed the line and it's unacceptable. I want people to be judged on their show and whether or not it's a good show. We all make mistakes, and we're all going to make mistakes.
Sure, and I'm with that. I mean, you make mistakes, and I said last week, you say you're sorry, and that's great. But in this case, Rick, I can't help but think that it affected the show, and it would affect his performance going forward.
His show was bad all along. He has been saying terrible things all along.
Okay.
Well, I mean, going back to 5 years ago when Martin Bashir was suspended at ABC for going to an Asian American journalist conference and talking about how he's happy to be with all these Asian babes and making a comment about a female colleague's dress. But on the other hand, I'm wondering, because the ultimate question, takeaway question here is this going to affect the tone of other people on MSNBC and elsewhere in a cable culture that I would say encourages pretty hot talk?
No. And yes. No.
Take a stand here.
No, I'm just, there are two distinct arguments here. No, in that they're still going to continue to be bombastic. Yes, in that I think they're on notice that you step over whatever imaginary line this is, you're out. And that means you're not going to be as much of an attack dog.
Let me move on to somebody who was often an attack dog on his MSNBC show, and that is Chris Matthews. President Obama trying to bounce back a bit from the healthcare debacle, gave the host of Hardball an exclusive interview this week. Let's take a look at some of that.
What's going to stop and arrest that decline of faith in you doing the right thing, you being honest? I mean, anybody who's president, this skepticism that's out there.
Well, look, the cynicism and the skepticism is deep.
Mr. President, your remarks the other day on economic justice, to me as a Roman Catholic, was so resonant with what the Holy Father Francis has been saying.
I'm not going to ask you whether Chris Matthews is playing hardball or softball. I think there's a consensus on that. How soft was he?
They muzzled the attack dog. What happened? Chris is known for going after people, for
interrupting people.
Hey, knock it up.
Yeah.
But for having soliloquies when he doesn't agree with what people are saying, not letting them jump in, only letting his liberal guests speak full and complete sentences. And in this case, he didn't do that. There was one question that about his management style being top-down or not. That
not being top-down enough in terms of the healthcare rollout. That was a good question.
I thought it was. But other than that, he let him speak.
That was Chris Matthews 7 years ago. I mean, let's face it. For the past 7 years, Chris Matthews has been all about just being a Rosie ODonnell talk show. He has not been. He's not a journalist. I mean, come on. He is not a journalist.
Well,
we know.
A commentator,
no,
just like
he's
there
not
are
even
commentators
that.
on Fox and
he's
on
like
CNN.
Rosie ODonnell with an opinion.
With lots of opinions.
And that's all this is, and that's what we should expect from him.
Well, when he played, go ahead, Kelly.
I completely disagree. As someone who's done Chris's show a few times,
you're a liberal.
I'm actually not a liberal.
What?
How would you describe
You're on the left.
No, I'm not, actually.
Oh, come on.
I'm a registered independent. You clearly haven't read any of my columns, and definitely not in the last few weeks, I would say.
You've changed in the last few weeks.
No, I mean, in the last few weeks, you haven't read any of my work, which is part of why I'm on the show today. But anyway, what I was going to say is I've been on Chris's show a few times, and the one thing that he's pretty well known for is certainly was expecting you to get to your point, and definitely by the second sentence. And if you're not there by the third, then he will cut you off, and then he will begin a monologue. He certainly doesn't let other people deliver monologues. And that's what I think people found surprising about this interview, is that the president gave not one monologue, not two, but there were like a few soliloquies. It was a little bit like Macbeth's long,
There were so many opportunities where the president even took a breath where somebody could have jumped in, pressed him, and I didn't see any of that. And to me, the low point was when Matthews played a clip from JFK and then asked that question about how do we get back to the confidence of the 1960s. I mean, he just kept serving up a platform for the president to give these mini speeches.
And if you are on the president's side, you probably thought that was okay. Allow him to speak and to talk about health care, but to, I think, journalists, it sounded like an infomercial.
So you're saying Matthews was playing to his base,
Of
and
course.
Obama fans liked it.
Right.
And was the president's strategy in going to MSNBC, where he had a bunch of pundits over to the White House a couple weeks ago, Fox's Juan Williams was also there, is that this would be a home team interview?
Yeah, it was going to be an easy interview. It wasn't going to be an interview. It was going to be a total infomercial.
But
I think the bigger issue here, Howie.
I would have thought that Matthews, just to protect himself, knowing that people like us would be critiquing it, would have asked a few more tough-sounding questions.
You're assuming that he thinks of himself as a journalist. I don't think he thinks of himself as a journalist. He's an entertainer right now with a couple of opinions. Look, I think the bigger issue here is NBC has a huge problem with the MSNBC hosts bleeding over into NBC. It's becoming just opinionated on NBC.
Real quick.
It's a big problem.
I'm getting the sense you don't watch Chris's show and you've never been on his show, because the reality is when Chris, even when he agrees with someone, he tends to cut them off.
Right.
He feels like he's not getting good
I've been
TV.
there. He's done it to me.
I've been there, too.
To me,
I've
was
been
the
there,
surprise
too.
of this interview is even if he 100% agrees with someone, that's just not the Chris Matthews I'm used to seeing. So
Yeah, it was a very different Chris Matthews. All right. Go on Twitter right now. Send me a tweet about the show. That's @HowardKurtz. We'll read some of your thoughts later in the program ahead. An exclusive interview with Glenn Greenwald. But first.